The sound of desperate splashing cut through the summer afternoon like a knife through silk. I dropped my coffee mug on the kitchen counter, the ceramic shattering against the granite as I bolted toward the sliding glass door. Through the window, I could see Ranger, my son's golden retriever, thrashing in the deep end of our community pool. His service vest, bright orange and unmistakable, floated beside him like a life preserver that couldn't save him. But it wasn't the sight of Ranger struggling that made my blood freeze. It was Karen Middleton, our HOA treasurer, standing at the pool gate with her arms crossed and a satisfied smirk playing across her lips. She held the gate firmly shut, her manicured nails gripping the metal bars, as if she were guarding Fort Knox instead of preventing a service animal from escaping what could become his watery grave. "Help somebody help him!" The voice cracked with terror, and it took me a moment to realize it was my own. I sprinted across the patio, my bare feet slapping against the hot concrete. The pool deck burned against my soles, but I barely felt it. Every second counted. Ranger's head kept disappearing beneath the chlorinated water, his paws scrambling against the smooth pool walls with no purchase. No hope. I reached the gate just as Karen stepped deliberately in front of it, blocking my path with the casual confidence of someone who believed she held all the cards. "Move!" I screamed, grabbing the gate handle. "Move now!" "I don't think so," Karen replied, her voice sickeningly sweet. "That animal has no business in our pool. Service dog or not, it's still just a pet. And pets aren't allowed in the community pool area." I shoved past her with force I didn't know I possessed, my maternal instincts overriding every social convention I'd been taught. The gate clanged open, and I dove into the pool fully clothed, my sundress billowing around me like a parachute as I hit the water. The chlorine burned my eyes, but I could see Ranger clearly now, his golden fur darkened to brown, his usually bright eyes wide with panic. My arms wrapped around his torso, and I kicked hard toward the shallow end, my lungs burning as I fought to keep both our heads above water. Ranger was heavier than I'd expected, waterlogged and exhausted from his struggle. His body trembled against mine as I finally reached the pool steps, both of us gasping and choking on the chemical-tainted water we'd swallowed. As I dragged us both onto the concrete, Ranger collapsed beside me, his sides heaving with the effort to breathe. I pressed my ear to his chest, relief flooding through me as I heard his heart beating strong and steady. He was alive, traumatized, but alive. "You had no right." Karen's shrill voice cut through my relief like nails on a chalkboard. "No right." I whipped around to face her, water streaming from my hair and clothes. "No right to save a drowning animal, a service animal that you deliberately put in danger. That's not a real service dog," she snapped, gesturing dismissively at Ranger, who was now sitting up but still panting heavily. "Anyone can buy those vests online. I've seen the news stories. People fake disabilities all the time just to bring their pets everywhere." The words hit me like a physical blow. In all my years working with service animals, I'd heard every ignorant comment, every dismissive assumption, but hearing someone question Ranger's legitimacy while he was still recovering from nearly drowning was beyond comprehension. Ranger wasn't just any service dog. He was a highly trained seizure-alert dog, certified through the most rigorous program in the country. He'd saved my son Tommy's life more times than I could count, sensing oncoming epileptic seizures minutes before they occurred and giving us precious time to get Tommy to safety. The orange vest he wore wasn't some internet purchase. It was issued by the Federal K-9 Certification Program, a program I knew intimately because I'd helped design it. But Karen didn't know that. She didn't know that behind my suburban mom exterior lay 15 years of experience as a federal K-9 unit inspector, or that I'd personally certified over 300 service animals across 12 states. She saw what she wanted to see: a woman she could bully, a dog she could dismiss, a situation she could control. "Where's Tommy?" I asked, suddenly realizing my 16-year-old son was nowhere to be seen. "The boy had another one of his little episodes," Karen said with obvious disdain. "Started shaking and carrying on by the pool chairs. I told him to take it somewhere else. This is a family facility, not a medical clinic." When he wouldn't leave, I took matters into my own hands regarding his so-called service animal. The world tilted on its axis. Tommy had had a seizure, and, instead of helping, this woman had attacked his service dog. The dog that could have prevented the seizure from becoming life-threatening. The dog that Tommy depended on for his safety and independence. "You pushed Ranger into the pool while my son was having a seizure." The words came out as barely a whisper, my voice strangled with disbelief. "I removed a disruptive animal from a public space," Karen corrected, as if we were discussing a minor administrative decision. "The dog was barking and carrying on, disturbing other residents. When it wouldn't leave on its own, I encouraged it to go for a swim." Encouraged it to go for a swim. As if Ranger had voluntarily jumped into the deep end of a pool he'd never been trained to navigate. As if the terror I'd seen in his eyes was just enthusiasm for an afternoon dip. I looked around the pool area with new eyes, taking in details I'd missed in my panic to save Ranger. There were no other residents present. Despite Karen's claim about disturbing others, the pool chairs showed signs of a struggle. One was overturned, and Tommy's backpack lay scattered on the ground, his medical alert bracelet glinting in the afternoon sun, where it had fallen from his wrist. Most telling of all was the security camera mounted on the pool house, its red recording light blinking steadily. Every moment of this encounter was being captured in high definition, including Karen's admission that she'd deliberately thrown a service animal into the pool while a disabled person was in medical distress. "Where is my son now?" I demanded, standing up and stepping closer to Karen. Water still dripped from my clothes, creating small puddles on the hot concrete. How should I know he ran off toward the house after his little performance? Probably went to get Mommy to come rescue his fake dog. She laughed, a harsh sound that made me want to grab her by the shoulders and shake her until she understood the magnitude of what she'd done. Instead, I pulled out my phone, ignoring the water damage warning that flashed on the screen. My hands shook as I dialed Tommy's number, praying he was safe, praying the seizure hadn't escalated in Ranger's absence. "Mom." Tommy's voice came through the speaker, weak but coherent. "Mom, where's Ranger? He was supposed to alert. But then that lady—" "He's okay. Sweetheart, we're both okay." "Are you at home?" "Yeah, I made it back. The seizure wasn't too bad this time. But I was so scared without Ranger." "Mom." She threw him in the pool. I tried to stop her, but then everything went fuzzy, and I couldn't. "You did everything right. Tommy, stay inside and rest. We'll be home in a few minutes." I hung up and turned back to Karen, who had been listening to the conversation with undisguised contempt. "Satisfied?" she asked. "Your son is fine. And now, maybe you'll keep that mutt away from our pool." The casual cruelty of her words, the complete lack of remorse for what she'd done, crystallized something inside me. This wasn't just about one incident of ignorance or prejudice. This was about a person who wielded power within our community to terrorize a disabled teenager and endanger his service animal, all while believing she was above consequences. Karen had picked the wrong family to terrorize, and she was about to discover exactly how wrong she'd been. "You know what, Karen? You're absolutely right. This incident is far from over." I scooped up Ranger's leash from where it had fallen by the pool edge, clipping it to his collar as he stood on shaky legs. "But not in the way you think. Are you threatening me?" Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her face. "I'm informing you. There are federal laws protecting service animals and the people who depend on them. What you did today violated at least 3 of them. Federal laws. Karen laughed, but it sounded forced now. You can't be serious. It's just a dog. And this is a private community. Federal laws don't apply to HOA regulations. I almost felt sorry for her then. Almost. She stood there in her designer workout clothes and her superiority complex, completely unaware that she'd just confessed to committing a federal crime against one of the most thoroughly documented service animals in the state. But I wasn't ready to reveal my hand yet. Let her think she was dealing with just another suburban mom who could be intimidated into silence. Let her believe she'd won this round. The security footage was already recorded. Her admissions already captured. Now I needed to gather the rest of the evidence that would ensure justice was served. We'll see about that, I said simply, leading Ranger toward the pool gate. Don't you walk away from me. Karen's voice rose to a near shriek. I'm treasurer of this HOA, and I have every right to enforce our community standards. I stopped and turned back one final time, meeting her gaze with steady calm. And I have every right to protect my son and his service animal from people who abuse their authority. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Karen, I know I'm going to enjoy mine. As I walked away, I could hear her muttering behind me about entitled parents and fake service dogs. She had no idea that, with every word, she was digging her legal grave deeper. The walk home took less than 5 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Ranger stayed close to my side, occasionally looking up at me with those trusting brown eyes that had seen too much trauma for one afternoon. His service vest was still damp, and I could feel him trembling slightly with each step. The psychological impact of what Karen had done might take weeks or months to fully manifest, and that thought made my anger burn even hotter. Tommy was waiting by the front door when we arrived, his face pale but alert. He dropped to his knees as soon as he saw Ranger, wrapping his arms around the dog's neck and burying his face in the damp fur. I'm so sorry. Boy, I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you. His voice was muffled, but I could hear the tears in it. This wasn't your fault, Tommy, I said firmly, placing my hand on his shoulder. You were having a medical emergency. Ranger understands that. But he tried to alert me. Mom, he was doing his job. And that woman she just threw him away like he was garbage. Tommy looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and furious. She called him a fake. She said I was faking too. The protective fury that had been simmering inside me erupted into white-hot rage. It was one thing to attack a service animal, but to accuse a disabled teenager of faking his condition while he was in medical distress crossed every line of human decency. She's going to pay for what she did. Tommy, I promise you that. How she's on the HOA board. Dad always says people like that never face consequences. It was true that my ex-husband had always been cynical about justice and accountability, but he'd never understood the full scope of my professional life. Even Tommy only knew that I worked for the federal government in some capacity related to animal services. The classified nature of some of my work meant I kept the details vague, even with family. But Karen's actions had crossed into my professional domain now, and that changed everything. Tommy, I need you to write down everything that happened today. Every detail you can remember about what Karen said and did. Can you do that for me? You mean like a police report? Exactly like a police report. And then I need you to rest while I make some phone calls. As Tommy headed to his room with Ranger close behind, I changed into dry clothes and sat down at my home office computer. The first call I made was to Dr. Martinez, Ranger's veterinarian, to schedule an emergency examination. Even if Ranger appeared physically unharmed, the psychological trauma of nearly drowning could manifest in behavioral changes that might affect his ability to perform his service duties. The second call was to my supervisor at the Federal K-9 Unit Inspection Division. Sarah Chen speaking. Sarah, it's Linda Matthews. I need to report an incident involving the deliberate endangerment of a federally certified service animal. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Sarah and I had worked together for 8 years, and she knew I didn't make calls like this lightly. Tell me everything. I laid out the entire incident in clinical detail, from Karen's initial confrontation with Tommy to her admission that she'd deliberately thrown Ranger into the pool. Sarah listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on what I assumed were the federal incident report forms. Linda, you realize this isn't just animal cruelty we're looking at. Interfering with a service animal during a medical emergency could qualify as a hate crime under the Americans with Disabilities Act enhancement provisions. I know. That's why I'm calling it in through official channels instead of just handling it locally. Do you have documentation of the animal's federal certification status? Ranger is certification number K9 SA4472, issued under my direct supervision 18 months ago. His training records, medical records, and performance evaluations are all in the federal database. Perfect. I'll pull the file and prepare the federal charges package. Do you have video evidence of the incident? The community pool has security cameras. I saw them recording during the incident. I'll have agents there within the hour to secure that footage before anyone thinks to tamper with it. Linda, I'm sorry this happened to Tommy and Ranger, but I'm also glad it happened to someone with your background and connections. Most families wouldn't know how to navigate the federal system. After hanging up, I called the community management office and requested copies of all pool-related security footage from the past week. I claimed it was for insurance purposes related to a slip-and-fall incident, which wasn't entirely untrue. Karen was about to experience a very significant fall from her position of power. The management office was surprisingly cooperative, probably because they assumed I was preparing to sue the community rather than one of its board members. They promised to have the footage ready for pickup within 24 hours. My third call was to Mark Stevenson, an attorney who specialized in disability rights cases. Mark had worked with our K-9 unit before on cases involving service animal discrimination, and I knew he understood both the legal complexities and the emotional stakes involved. Linda, good to hear from you. Please tell me this is a social call and not another case of service animal abuse. I wish I could. Mark, after explaining the situation, Mark was quiet for a long moment. Linda, this is potentially a career-ending case for whoever did this. Deliberately endangering a certified service animal during a medical emergency. With video evidence and federal documentation, we're looking at criminal charges, civil penalties, and possible jail time. Good. I'll file the preliminary civil suit tomorrow morning. But Linda, are you prepared for what this might unleash? HOA boards can be vindictive. And if this woman has allies, let them try. They picked a fight with the wrong family. As I hung up, I realized that Karen had no idea what was coming. In her mind, she'd successfully intimidated a suburban mother and removed an unwanted animal from her precious pool. She probably expected me to complain to a few neighbors and maybe write a strongly worded letter to the HOA board. Instead, she was about to face the full weight of federal law enforcement, disability rights litigation, and animal cruelty charges. All because she couldn't be bothered to show basic human decency to a disabled teenager and his service animal. That evening, as I was helping Tommy with his homework, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Karen's number, and I almost smiled as I answered. Mrs. Matthews, this is Karen Middleton. I think we may have had a misunderstanding this afternoon. Her tone was completely different now, conciliatory, almost nervous. I wondered what had prompted the change in attitude. I don't think there was any misunderstanding. Karen, You threw my son's service dog into the pool while he was having a seizure. That seems pretty clear-cut to me. Well, when you put it like that, it sounds more dramatic than it really was. I was just trying to remove a disruptive animal from a public space. Perhaps I was a bit overzealous in my approach. Overzealous. As if attempted drowning was just an enthusiastic enforcement of pool rules. What exactly do you want? Karen. I want to make this right. Maybe we could meet for coffee tomorrow and discuss how to move forward. I'm sure we can reach some kind of understanding. An understanding? She wanted to make a deal, probably offering some token gesture in exchange for my silence. The desperation in her voice told me that someone had explained to her just how serious her situation might be. I don't think that's necessary. Karen, the appropriate authorities are handling this matter now. Appropriate authorities? What do you mean this is just a community matter? Surely we don't need to involve outsiders. When you attack a federally protected service animal, it stops being a community matter. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Federally protected, I don't understand. You will. Have a good evening. Karen. I hung up, ignoring her attempts to call back. Let her stew in uncertainty for a while. Tomorrow would bring enough clarity for everyone involved. The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Federal agents arrived at the community pool at 8 a.m. sharp. Much to the bewilderment of the early morning swim classes, they secured the security footage, interviewed the pool maintenance staff, and took detailed photographs of the scene. By noon, Karen was in custody. The charges were impressive in their scope: animal cruelty under state law, interfering with a service animal under federal disability statutes, and reckless endangerment. The federal prosecutor had added a hate crime enhancement based on Karen's statements about Tommy's disability being fake. The security footage was damning. It showed Karen approaching Tommy as he sat by the pool with Ranger, alerting to an oncoming seizure. Instead of helping or calling for assistance, she could be seen arguing with Tommy, then grabbing Ranger by his service vest and literally throwing him into the deep end of the pool. What made it even worse was that the footage showed her standing at the pool edge for several seconds, watching Ranger struggle, before moving to block the gate when I arrived. It wasn't just animal cruelty, it was calculated cruelty, deliberate torture of a service animal while his handler was in medical distress. The HOA board held an emergency meeting that afternoon. Karen was immediately suspended from her position as treasurer, and a formal investigation was launched into her conduct. Several other residents came forward with stories of Karen's previous incidents of harassment and intimidation, painting a picture of someone who had used her position of authority to terrorize anyone she deemed undesirable. Dr. Martinez's examination of Ranger revealed no physical injuries, but she recommended ongoing behavioral monitoring for signs of water-related trauma. The psychological evaluation would be critical for the civil case, as it established the full scope of damage Karen's actions had caused. The story hit the local news that evening, and, by the next morning, it had gone viral on social media. The combination of service animal abuse, disability discrimination, and HOA overreach created a perfect storm of public outrage. Karen's photo was being shared thousands of times, along with condemnations of her actions and calls for maximum prosecution. What the public didn't know, and what made the case even more significant, was my role in the federal K-9 certification program. The prosecutor was keeping that detail under wraps for now, but it would become relevant during sentencing. Karen hadn't just attacked any service animal. She'd attacked one of the most thoroughly documented and federally protected animals in the country. 2 weeks later, I sat in a federal courtroom watching Karen's arraignment. She had hired an expensive attorney who tried to minimize her actions as a misunderstanding, but the video evidence made that argument impossible to sustain. The judge, a woman in her 60s who clearly had no patience for animal cruelty, set bail at $50,000, and imposed strict conditions including no contact with our family and a prohibition on entering community common areas. As Karen was led away in handcuffs, she looked directly at me for the first time since her arrest. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked like fear and confusion. She still didn't understand how a simple act of HOA enforcement had escalated into federal charges and national headlines. But understanding would come during the trial preparation, when Mark Stevenson would reveal my credentials during the discovery process. Karen would learn that she hadn't just attacked a suburban mom and her son's pet. She'd committed federal crimes against a K-9 unit inspector and a service animal certified under the most stringent federal standards in existence. The civil case moved forward in parallel with the criminal proceedings. Mark filed suit not just against Karen personally, but against the HOA for failing to train their board members on disability law and creating an environment where discrimination could flourish. The damages we sought were substantial veterinary costs for Ranger's ongoing behavioral therapy, medical expenses for Tommy's emergency care, pain and suffering for both Tommy and myself, and punitive damages designed to ensure this kind of incident never happened again. But money wasn't really the point. The point was establishing a precedent that service animals and their handlers couldn't be attacked with impunity, even by people in positions of community authority. The breakthrough came during Karen's deposition, when Mark finally revealed my professional background. The look on her face when she learned that she'd attacked the service dog of a federal K-9 inspector was almost worth the trauma we'd all endured. "You're telling me that Mrs. Matthews works for the federal government in K-9 services?" Karen's attorney looked like he'd been hit by a truck. "Not just works for them," Mark replied smoothly. "She's one of the senior inspectors responsible for certifying service animals under federal programs. Ranger isn't just any service dog, he's certified under programs Mrs. Matthews helped design." Karen's face went white, even through her entitlement and arrogance. She was smart enough to understand what that meant. She hadn't just committed a crime. She'd committed a crime against someone with the knowledge and connections to ensure maximum prosecution. "I want to settle," she whispered to her attorney. "I don't think that's going to be possible," Mark replied. "My clients aren't interested in settlement. They want accountability." The trial began 6 months after the incident. Karen had lost weight, her usually perfect appearance showing the strain of facing federal charges and national scrutiny. Her defense attorney tried to portray her as a concerned community member who had made an error in judgment. But the security footage made that argument impossible. Tommy testified on the second day, explaining how Ranger's alerts had prevented dozens of serious seizures over the past year and a half. His voice was steady and clear as he described the terror of watching his service dog being thrown into the pool while he was unable to help due to his medical condition. "Ranger isn't just my dog," Tommy told the jury. "He's my safety, my independence, my ability to live a normal life." When she threw him in that pool, she wasn't just hurting an animal. She was attacking my ability to function in the world. I testified on the third day, explaining Ranger's extensive training and federal certification. The prosecutor walked me through my credentials and experience, establishing that I was one of the foremost experts in the country on service animal standards and certification. "In your professional opinion, was Ranger performing his duties as a service animal at the time of the incident?" the prosecutor asked. "Absolutely." The security footage shows classic seizure-alert behavior. Ranger was doing exactly what he was trained to do, providing medical assistance to my son during a potentially life-threatening episode. And what was the defendant's response to this medical emergency? She attacked the service animal providing medical assistance and prevented him from fulfilling his duties. In 15 years of service animal work, I've never seen such a deliberate and malicious interference with a working service dog. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Karen was found guilty on all counts animal cruelty. interfering with a service animal, reckless endangerment, and the hate crime enhancement for disability-based discrimination. At sentencing, the judge addressed Karen directly. "Mrs. Middleton, your actions on that day represent a profound failure of human decency. You saw a disabled teenager in medical distress, and instead of helping, you attacked the animal trained to save his life. The callousness and cruelty of your actions are beyond comprehension." Karen received 18 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of probation with community service requirements focused on disability advocacy. The judge also ordered her to pay full restitution for Ranger's behavioral therapy and Tommy's medical expenses. The civil case concluded with an even more significant victory. The jury awarded us $2 million in damages, finding both Karen and the HOA liable for the attack. The HOA was required to implement comprehensive disability training for all board members and establish clear protocols for handling service animal issues. But the most satisfying outcome was the establishment of the federal precedent. The case became part of the legal framework protecting service animals, ensuring that future attacks would face similarly serious consequences. Karen's house went into foreclosure during her prison sentence, the legal fees and civil judgment having destroyed her finances. The community pool where she'd tried to drown Ranger was renamed the Tommy Matthews Memorial Pool in honor of Tommy's courage during the ordeal. Though Tommy was very much alive to enjoy the recognition, most importantly, Ranger made a full recovery from his trauma. Dr. Martinez's behavioral therapy program was successful, and within 6 months, he was back to his normal routine of keeping Tommy safe from seizures. The incident had actually strengthened their bond, as if Ranger understood that he'd survived something terrible and was even more dedicated to his protective duties. A year after the incident, I received a letter from a mother in Oregon whose son's service dog had been attacked by a restaurant manager. She'd read about our case online and wanted to know how to pursue similar charges. I spent an hour on the phone with her, walking her through the federal process and connecting her with attorneys who specialized in service animal law. That letter led to others: parents, disabled adults, service animal trainers, all reaching out for advice on how to protect their rights and their animals. I realized that our victory had created something bigger than justice for one family. It had created a roadmap for others facing similar discrimination. Tommy started a blog about living with epilepsy and working with a service dog. His posts about Ranger's training, their daily routines, and the importance of service animal rights reached thousands of readers. He'd found his voice as an advocate, turning his traumatic experience into a platform for education and empowerment. The HOA underwent a complete transformation after the case. Karen's allies on the board were voted out, replaced by residents who understood that community leadership meant serving all members, including those with disabilities. They established a service animal support program and became a model for other communities dealing with similar issues. 2 years later, I was invited to speak at a national conference on service animal law, standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of attorneys, advocates, and disabled individuals with their service animals. I thought about how far we'd all come from that terrible afternoon by the pool. Justice isn't just about punishment, I told the audience. It's about creating a world where service animals and their handlers can live with dignity and safety. It's about ensuring that no one else has to watch their child's lifeline being thrown into a pool by someone who thinks power gives them the right to be cruel. After my speech, a young woman approached me with her guide dog, a beautiful German Shepherd with intelligent eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "My dog and I are safer because of what you and Tommy did." That night, back in our hotel room, Tommy and Ranger were sprawled across the bed watching television. Ranger's head was resting on Tommy's legs, his alert expression softening into contentment. They'd both grown stronger from their ordeal, more confident in their bond, and their place in the world. "Mom," Tommy said without looking away from the TV, "do you think Karen ever understood what she did wrong?" It was a question I'd wondered about many times during the long legal process. Karen had never shown genuine remorse, never seemed to grasp that her actions had endangered both Tommy and Ranger. Even at sentencing, her apology had felt scripted and hollow. "I don't know, sweetheart, but understanding isn't really the point anymore. The point is that the law is clear now, and other people like Karen will think twice before attacking service animals." "Good," Tommy replied, scratching behind Ranger's ears. "Nobody should have to go through what we did." As I watched them together, I realized that Karen had inadvertently given us something valuable, along with all the trauma and fear. She'd given us a platform, a voice, and a mission. Our fight for justice had become a fight for everyone who depended on service animals for their safety and independence. The community pool where it all began was still there, but it looked different now. A bronze plaque by the gate explained the rights of service animals and their handlers. Children took swim lessons in the same water where Ranger had nearly drowned. But now they were learning alongside kids with disabilities and their service dogs. The transformation wasn't just legal or institutional, it was cultural. Our community had learned that true strength came from protecting its most vulnerable members, not from excluding them. The pool that had once been a symbol of Karen's cruelty had become a symbol of inclusion and understanding. On quiet evenings, Tommy and Ranger still visited the pool area, though they rarely went swimming. They would sit by the water's edge, Tommy doing homework, while Ranger kept his watchful vigil for seizure signs. Other residents often stopped to chat, many of them apologizing for not speaking up sooner about Karen's behavior. "We should have known," Mrs. Peterson from down the street had said one evening. "We should have seen how she treated anyone she thought didn't belong." But I didn't blame the neighbors for their silence. Karen had been skilled at wielding her authority in ways that made resistance seem futile. It took federal charges and national attention to break the spell of institutional power that had protected her for so long. The letters from other families continued to arrive regularly, each one representing another battle in the ongoing war for service animal rights. Some cases were clear-cut violations like Karen's. Others involved more subtle forms of discrimination that required careful legal strategy to address. I'd started consulting on the most complex cases, lending my federal expertise to families who found themselves facing institutional resistance. It wasn't just about the law anymore. It was about changing hearts and minds. One case at a time, one community at a time. 3 years after Karen's conviction, I received an unexpected phone call from her former attorney. Karen had been released from prison and was working as a janitor at a disability advocacy center as part of her community service requirement. "She asked me to contact you," the attorney said. "She wants to apologize. Face to face. She says prison gave her time to think about what she did." I discussed it with Tommy that evening, leaving the decision up to him. Ranger had recovered completely from his trauma, but Tommy still carried emotional scars from watching his service dog being attacked while he was helpless to intervene. "What do you think she wants?" he asked. "Probably forgiveness. Maybe closure. Prison changes people, sometimes for the better. Do you want to see her? Only if you do. This is your choice. Tommy, she hurt you more than anyone." Tommy was quiet for a long time, absently stroking Ranger's head as he thought. Finally, he looked up at me with the kind of wisdom that comes from surviving something terrible and emerging stronger. "Let's do it. Not for her, but for us. I want to see if she really understands what she did." We met Karen at the disability center where she was working, a neutral location that felt safe for everyone involved. She looked different, older, thinner, with none of the entitled arrogance that had defined her during our previous encounters. when she saw Tommy and Ranger enter the room. She immediately started crying. "I am so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I am so deeply, truly sorry for what I did to you and to Ranger. There is no excuse for my actions. No justification for the cruelty I showed you." Tommy listened quietly, his hand resting on Ranger's head. The dog seemed calm, showing no signs of recognizing Karen or experiencing any trauma from her presence. "Why?" Tommy asked simply. "Why did you do it?" Karen took a shaky breath before answering. "Because I was angry and afraid and small inside. And I took that out on you because I thought I could get away with it. I thought my position on the HOA board made me important, gave me the right to decide who belonged and who didn't. I was wrong about everything. Do you understand now what Ranger means to me?" Tommy's voice was steady, mature beyond his 19 years. "He's your lifeline, your independence, your safety. I tried to take that away from you during a medical emergency, and I could have killed you both. Working here, seeing people with service animals every day, I understand now what I couldn't see then. You weren't asking for special treatment, you were just trying to live your life." For the first time since the incident, I saw genuine remorse in Karen's eyes. Prison and community service had done what our legal victory couldn't. They'd forced her to confront the humanity she'd ignored in Tommy and countless others. "I forgive you," Tommy said quietly. "Not because what you did was okay, but because carrying anger around hurts me more than it hurts you." Karen sobbed openly then, the sound of someone finally understanding the magnitude of what they'd done and the grace they were being offered despite it. As we prepared to leave, Karen had one final request. Could I apologize to Ranger too?" Tommy nodded, and Karen knelt down beside the golden retriever who had nearly died because of her cruelty. She placed her hand gently on his head, speaking so softly I could barely hear her words. "I'm sorry, beautiful boy. I'm sorry for hurting you and scaring you. You're a good dog, doing important work, and I should have protected you instead of attacking you." Ranger, ever the professional service dog, remained calm and alert throughout the encounter. But as we walked away, I noticed him staying closer to Tommy than usual, his protective instincts heightened by the emotional intensity of the meeting. That night, as I tucked Tommy into bed, like I had when he was small, he asked me a question that made me proud of the young man he'd become. "Mom, do you think our case really changed things? Or do you think people like Karen just got better at hiding their prejudice?" "Both. Probably. But even people hiding their prejudice is progress. Tommy, it means they know it's wrong now, even if they don't feel it yet. And for every person like Karen who had to be forced to change, there are others who genuinely learned and grew from what happened. I hope so. I hope other kids with service dogs never have to go through what we did." "They won't, sweetheart. Not exactly what we did. Anyway, the laws are stronger now. The awareness is higher, and people know there are consequences for attacking service animals. That's your legacy, making the world safer for other kids like you." As I turned off his light and closed his door, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. What had started as the worst day of our lives had transformed into a mission that had touched thousands of families and strengthened protections for service animals nationwide. Karen had chosen cruelty over compassion that day by the pool, and her choice had consequences that rippled far beyond what she could have imagined. But Tommy had chosen forgiveness over vengeance, justice over revenge, and his choices had rippled even further. In the quiet of my home office, surrounded by letters from grateful families and certificates of appreciation from disability advocacy groups, I opened my laptop and began typing the monthly newsletter for the Service Animal Protection Network we'd established. The lead story was about a successful prosecution in Texas, where a restaurant manager who had refused service to a veteran with a PTSD service dog was convicted under the federal statutes. Our case had helped strengthen. The veteran's family had used our legal roadmap to navigate the system and achieve justice. As I wrote, I could hear Tommy and Ranger in the living room, playing their nightly game of hide-and-seek. The sound of Tommy's laughter, bright and unafraid, was the most beautiful reminder of how far we'd all come from that terrible afternoon by the pool. Karen Middleton had tried to drown my son's service dog, thinking she could act with impunity because of her position and our apparent vulnerability. She'd picked the wrong family to terrorize, but more importantly, she'd picked the wrong values to embrace. In the end, it wasn't my federal credentials or legal knowledge that had defeated her. It was the simple truth that cruelty toward the vulnerable is wrong, and that justice, though sometimes delayed, is never truly denied. The pool where it all began still sparkled in the evening light, but now it reflected something different than Karen's arrogance and entitlement. It reflected a community that had learned to value inclusion over exclusion, compassion over cruelty, and justice over convenience. And in our home, a young man and his service dog continued their vital partnership, protected now, not just by training and vigilance, but by laws that recognize their worth and a community that understood their value. Sometimes the strongest currents run beneath calm surfaces, and sometimes the most important victories come from the battles we never wanted to fight. Karen had given us the fight of our lives, but in defeating her cruelty, we discovered our own strength and purpose. The golden retriever, who had nearly drowned in a pool filled with hatred, now swam safely in an ocean of support, legal protection, and community understanding. And that transformation, born from one family's refusal to accept injustice, had created waves that would protect countless others for generations to come. In the end, Karen's attempt to assert power through cruelty had backfired spectacularly, creating not just consequences for herself, but systemic change that would prevent others from following in her footsteps. She had intended to silence and intimidate, but had instead amplified our voices and strengthened our resolve. The service dog she'd tried to drown became the catalyst for legislation, litigation, and social change that protected thousands of service animals across the country. The disabled teenager she'd dismissed and attacked became an advocate whose voice reached millions through his blog and speaking engagements. And the suburban mother she'd tried to intimidate turned out to be someone with the knowledge, connections, and determination to ensure that justice was not just served, but transformed into lasting protection for others. As I finished the newsletter and prepared for bed, I realized that every family who would never face what we had faced, every service animal who would swim safely in community pools, every disabled person who would live with dignity and respect, they were all part of Karen's unwitting legacy. She had chosen to be a villain in our story, but in defeating her villainy, we had all become heroes in stories still being written by families we would never meet. And that, perhaps, was the most fitting consequence of all, that her moment of cruelty had created countless moments of compassion, protection, and justice. The pool still sparkled under the evening stars, but now it reflected hope instead of hatred, promise instead of prejudice. And somewhere in the house behind me, a young man slept peacefully beside his service dog, both of them safe in the knowledge that their community, their country, and their future held room for their dreams.